It all started, as usual, late one evening at the office. I'm Ethan, a middle manager at a marketing agency, stuck in an endless cycle of reports and deadlines. Our office occupies the 7th floor of an old commercial building in the heart of the city, a structure that was once glorious, with a splendid marble lobby and ornate columns, but now tainted by time and neglect. The stone walls are chipped, the floors creak no matter how lightly you step, and the air always smells of old dust and cheap cleaning chemicals. During the day, the building still has some vitality with a stream of people in suits rushing in and out. But after 8 o'clock in the evening, it seemed to turn into a ghost ship. The hallway became suffocatingly quiet, with only the hum of the aging air conditioning system and occasionally the hurried footsteps of security staff on short patrols. The silence at night here is not a peaceful stillness, but a heavy silence, as if the very air itself is thick, containing secrets that are best left undisturbed. My job requires regular overtime hours. Most nights, I'm the last one to leave, usually around 9 or 10. Sitting alone in a cramped office, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I tried to focus on the blurry numbers on the screen. It is monotonous but necessary work, and it was during those late, lonely hours that I began to hear it. Lose, lose, lose. 3 knocks. It's always 3 hours, with an annoyingly regular rhythm. They echoed off the thin wall separating my office from the hallway. At first, I dismissed it. Probably the sound of an old water pipe expanding, or some strange noise from the ventilation system. Old buildings always make strange sounds, especially at night when the temperature changes. But the precision of those 3 knocks, it was so deliberate. It's not random like the sound of water leaking or a broken fan. It's tap, 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 then silence. Every time that happened, my heart pounded. A chill ran down my spine, as if the source of that sound was right behind me. I tried mentioning this to my superiors, but only received an indifferent shrug and the usual explanation about old buildings. My colleagues laughed, saying that perhaps I was obsessed with work or that there was a ghost colleague who was unhappy with me staying late. Their half-hearted humor only made me feel more isolated. Then things got worse. On a particularly stressful night, as I was trying to finish an important report, I heard a loud thump echoing from the end of the hallway. It was the sound of the old wooden door of the storage room, a room I rarely used and always made sure I locked. The sound of the door closing was so strong that I jumped, spilling my cup of coffee. Heart pounding, I rushed into the hallway. The hallway was empty, with only flickering fluorescent lights casting dancing shadows on the walls. I checked the storeroom door. It was still locked tightly. The door handle was cold, and there was no sign of being pried open or of any wind blowing through. There is no reasonable explanation. From that night, my work turned into a battle against my own fears and imagination. The feeling of being watched becomes constant. Every time I tried to concentrate, the hair on my arms stood up. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioner crept into my bones. I found myself constantly glancing out into the hallway, completely convinced that someone was standing there, just out of sight, watching me. My breathing became shallow and labored, as if half the air in the office had been drained. The strange events didn't stop there. The objects on my desk started to get mixed up. My pens were neatly stacked next to the keyboard. My documents were carefully organized the next morning. They were inexplicably messy. I asked the cleaning staff, but they confirmed that they only took out the trash and cleaned the floor, and never touched my table. One morning, I arrived to find my stapler perched precariously on top of a closed folder, an absurd position, as if someone had deliberately set up a petty, cruel joke. Cold fear tightened its grip on my chest. Determined not to let fear control me, I tried to arrange my work to leave earlier, before night completely fell. But deadlines wait for no one. Before long, I was stuck at the office again on a Thursday night. Stress weighs heavily on the shoulders. The air in the building seemed thicker than ever. The hallway outside my office now resembles a dark tunnel, even though the lights are still on. The weak orange light from the old light bulbs made the peeling paint on the wall look like dried bloodstains. Lose, lose, lose. This time, the sound seemed closer, clearer. My heart felt like it wanted to jump out of my chest. I turned off the desk lamp, leaving only the fluorescent overhead, and listened. There was no second knock, but just that one time was enough to make me restless. Trembling, I walked out into the hallway. The silence was overwhelming, thick and menacing. The veins in my neck pounded, and I could taste the bitter taste of adrenaline on my tongue. I checked the storeroom door again, still locked, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, as if something was hovering right over my shoulder. My scalp tingled. I turned around, half expecting and half afraid to see a figure. The hallway is still empty, but at that moment, the light above my head flashed violently, continuously. In that moment of flickering, disorienting light, I could have sworn I saw it. A dark figure stood motionless at the end of the hallway, where the darkness was thickest. Then the light stabilized again, and the figure disappeared. I don't think anymore. In extreme panic, I rushed back to my desk and slammed the office door, an act that betrayed the fear that was taking over me. My breathing was panting and ragged. My hands were shaking so much that I almost spilled the rest of my coffee. I tried to reassure myself, telling my pale reflection in the glass of the filing cabinet that it was just stress, an illusion created by the flickering lights. But deep inside, I know that's not true. That night, the knocking returned, many times, 3 times each time, growing louder and more fierce, as if challenging me, calling me to face it. Sweat broke out on my temples, and my chest ached. I didn't dare close my eyes, afraid that in that moment of darkness, something would appear right in front of me. It's almost midnight. I can't stand it anymore. I quickly packed my things, grabbed my coat and rushed towards the elevator. The trip down was painfully slow, each creak and rattle of the old elevator cabin repeating the rhythm of those 3 terrifying knocks. The next morning, my office was again in chaos. The papers I was sure had been put away were scattered across the table. The computer screen is tilted, and there was a strange, faint, unpleasant smell, a smell of mold and something almost sulfur. My stomach tightened. I know I can't continue working here. Fear was deeply ingrained in my mind. I seriously considered quitting my job. No job is worth sacrificing your sanity and safety. But then the manager asked me to come back to complete some important handover procedures. My mind raced with images of the locked storage room, silhouettes of people moving in the flickering light, doors slamming and opening on their own. Would I dare go back there? Should I face it one last time? Or should I run away and never look back? Part of me knows that, no matter what choice I make, that old commercial building has left its mark on me. That horror will not fade easily. That rhythmic tapping sound, tap, 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 still seems to echo somewhere in my mind, a reminder that some doors are best never opened. After a horrifying experience at the office building, I decided to completely change my living environment. I need a quiet place, a place that can help me regain balance. The opportunity came when my parents moved away for work, leaving me with my family's childhood home. A sturdy, somewhat ancient, 2-story wooden house, located in a quiet suburb with a large but somewhat wild garden. They entrusted it to me to look after and preserve the family legacy. On the outside, the house doesn't look scary. The lower floor is quite cozy with a living room, small office, and kitchen. But the second floor is a different story. It sat largely unused for many years, becoming an archive of the past, filled with old white-covered furniture, dusty trunks, and countless black and white or sepia-toned portraits of generations of ancestors whose names I barely knew. My parents never told of any tragedy or curse associated with the house, simply keeping these items to honor the heritage. From the beginning, I felt something was wrong with the second floor. Every time I have to go up there to get things, a heavy, stuffy feeling presses on my chest. The air was thick with the smell of dust, rotten wood, and old fabric. I tried to explain that it was just the closed space and lack of ventilation, but the feeling of being watched couldn't be ignored. The eyes in the portraits seemed to follow my every step, their gazes blank but full of judgment. One night, when I came home later than usual, just as I put the key in the lock, I stopped. A soft sound rang out from upstairs. It was not the usual creaking sound of old wood. It sounded like the sound of something wooden being dragged gently and slowly across the floor. A chair? My heart beat strongly. I turned on the hallway light, held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. The silence returned, but now it had an air of tense anticipation. Fighting every instinct that was screaming at me to stay downstairs, I decided to go check it out. Climbing stairs at night is a challenge. Each step creaked under my feet like a warning. The second-floor hallway is bathed in dim light from a single light bulb at the end of the row, occasionally flickering. The portraits on the wall seemed to come alive in the darkness, strange faces staring back at me. When I got there, I didn't find anything unusual. Everything is still the same as the last time I came here. No chairs were moved. There was no sign that anyone had been here. But the feeling of insecurity is still there, stronger. I couldn't shake the thought that something was lurking, watching me from behind closed doors or from deep shadows. I quickly retreated downstairs, feeling like a cold hand was placed on the back of my neck. After that night, strange phenomena began to happen more often. As I sat down to work in the evening, I heard light footsteps walking above my head. Sometimes there was a soft tapping sound along the second-floor hallway, as if someone was tapping the wall with their knuckles, slowly, steadily, almost tauntingly. Every time that happens, my chest tightens and breathing becomes difficult. But every time I mustered up the courage to check, the upstairs was silent and still, leaving only the old scent of time. Then I started to notice more subtle things. The doors to the room on the second floor, which I was sure were closed, were found to be slightly open the next morning. At first, I thought to myself maybe I forgot or it was because of the draft. But this situation repeated itself with many different doors, even the lid of an old chest I kept under my bed. The feeling of being watched became gnawing. I started to get paranoid, glancing over my shoulder every time I stood at the foot of the stairs. Desperate for a reasonable explanation, I decided to install a few small security cameras in the second-floor hallway. The technician assured me that they would record every movement, no matter how small, and I could check it directly on my phone at any time. The first few days, everything seemed normal. The camera only recorded images of the quiet hallway at night, with shadows cast by the streetlights outside. But then, they started having problems. Both cameras suddenly turned off at the same time around midnight, right around the time I usually hear strange noises. When I checked, no logs were saved, or the files were corrupt, just showing streaks of noise or a lingering black screen. They work normally again during the day, but fail at the most sensitive hours. It feels like something is deliberately interfering, preventing me from finding the truth. My nerves are increasingly tense. I confided in a friend over the phone. He thinks it could be because the old wiring upstairs is faulty, or there are animals in the attic. He offered to come check it out for me this weekend. I thanked him for his kindness, but hesitated. I don't want to drag others into this heavy, suffocating atmosphere. The scent upstairs also began to change. Besides the smell of dust and old wood, there was now something else, both disturbingly familiar and indefinable. Perhaps it was the smell of forgotten ancient clothes, or the faint perfume of a woman who had walked this hallway a long time ago. Whatever it was, it made my stomach churn with fear. The pressure in my chest got worse every time I went to the second floor. My ears were ringing. My heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear it hitting my eardrums. Sometimes, I find myself talking to myself in an empty space, reassuring it that I have no bad intentions, just need to get a book or some item. I told myself it was to relieve stress, but deep down, I knew I was trying to appease an invisible presence. One evening, the noise became too loud to ignore. I was sitting downstairs reading a book when I heard hurried footsteps above, as if someone was running back and forth from one end of the hallway to the other. The echoing sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This time, I knew I had to face it. Holding the flashlight firmly, I slowly climbed the stairs. The second-floor hallway is almost dark. The only light bulb at the end of the row was extinguished. I turned on the flashlight, the weak light cutting a narrow path through the darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest. The air was cold and thick, making it difficult to breathe. The eyes in the portraits stared at me again, sparkling eerily in the flickering flashlight light. Then I saw a small movement near one of the bedroom doors. A shadow passed quickly across the threshold. I wasn't sure if it was an illusion created by my shaky flashlight or if it was an actual shape. My lungs felt frozen. Mouth is dry. I remember the old chest under the bed in that room. Inside there are old photos and letters, which may contain clues to the house's past. Even though my parents didn't say it, I always suspected there was some secret buried here. With my heart racing and my hands shaking, I knelt beside the bed and pulled out the heavy trunk. Dust flew blindly. It felt like an invisible hand was pressing on my shoulder. Inside the trunk, among musty albums and ribbon-tied letters, I found an old, discolored envelope with a name written on it that I vaguely recognized from a portrait in the hallway. My instincts screamed at me to stop, to let the past rest. But I need answers. I carefully opened the envelope. The flashlight flashed again. The darkness in the hallway seemed to be swelling, pressing into the room. The letter inside wrote about an indescribable sense of guilt, about haunting regrets. It gives no specifics, but hints at a deep sadness, an unresolved anguish that has colored this house for generations. I suddenly realized that the presence upstairs was not a coincidence. It can be tied to this pain, an echo that refuses to fade. The suffocating fear I felt for so long was its desperate bid for attention, a silent call for me to acknowledge its pain. At that moment, my flashlight dimmed. I heard a light rustle right behind me, like fabric rubbing against each other. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My limbs felt like they were frozen. With a superhuman effort, I forced myself to whisper into the void, my voice trembling with fear. "I understand. I know."
I'm sorry.
I tried to put the letter back in the chest, whispering that I wouldn't forget. Immediately, the cold in the air seemed to recede. The heavy silence still covered the room, but there was no longer a sense of tension or threat, but a stillness that was almost sad. I stood up, stepped back, and shined my flashlight into the hallway. My lungs burned from holding my breath. I carefully walked out, half expecting a cold hand to grab me, but nothing happened. The hallway is empty. As I crossed the threshold and descended the stairs, the heavy feeling in my chest seemed to lighten a bit. I collapsed on the sofa downstairs, my whole body trembling, cold sweat pouring out. But strangely, there was a strange feeling of peace in my heart, as if admitting that old secret had somehow eased the oppressive atmosphere. That night and the days that followed, the house became quieter. The strange noises subsided. The doors are still closed. The camera no longer records anything unusual. The tension in my chest still comes back from time to time as a reminder, but it's no longer as intense as before. I knew I had stumbled upon a hidden truth. I decided not to tell anyone about the letter or that terrible night. I can't prove anything, and maybe it's best to leave the past alone. But the house has changed in my eyes. It still carries old memories, emotional scars deeply embedded in every grain of wood and every wall. Sometimes, when I stand at the foot of the stairs at night, I still feel the echo of that look following me. It no longer seemed threatening, but left a lingering feeling of unease, a reminder that there are mysteries that never truly fade, and there are pains that still whisper in the silence. Thinking that leaving my family's old house would help me escape the feeling of insecurity, I moved to a small apartment in the city, near a fairly large public park. I hope immersing myself in urban life and green spaces will help me regain my spirit. That park quickly became my refuge, where I often jogged every afternoon to relieve stress after work. The winding roads, shady trees, lakeside benches, all are familiar and peaceful, until one late afternoon. That day, I stayed in the office longer than usual, so my jog started when it was already dark. Instead of following the familiar paved road along the lake, I decided to try a less traveled dirt trail that cut through the denser forest in the park. I think a little darkness would be okay, and would even add a bit of challenge to the workout. As I ran deeper into the trail, the light from the sparse street lamps gradually disappeared, giving way to increasingly dense darkness. The spindly tree branches stretched out above his head like bony arms. A vague feeling of unease began to creep into my stomach. That heavy feeling tells me I'm not alone. I slowed down and strained my ears to listen. A rustling sound came from the bushes on the right, not like the usual wind blowing leaves, but a deliberate rustling sound. I stopped completely, my heart pounding. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I held my breath and listened. There were no footsteps, no movement. There was only the sound of my heart pounding in my chest and the distant hum of traffic. It must be a stray cat, I told myself, even though the uneasy feeling remained. I kept running, but slower, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The air seemed to become unusually still, with only my panting breaking the silence. Then I saw it. Lying in a small clearing next to the trail was an old, open leather wallet. Inside was empty, except for a crumpled business card lying half open. Something about the way it was placed there, so obvious, so deliberate, made me shudder. Not far away, I discovered other strange things. A few candles had almost burned out. Candle wax had melted into small puddles on the grass, and scribbled lines on the ground formed concentric circles. I didn't dare look closely at the symbols. The feeling of being watched became intense, as if dozens of eyes were focused on me from the surrounding darkness. My mouth was dry, a strong metallic taste rising in my throat. Whatever happened here, I want nothing to do with it. I left my purse behind, turned around, and sprinted toward the brighter, more crowded part of the park. I didn't dare look back, completely convinced that there was a shadow chasing after me. As I approached the bright lampposts, my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were about to collapse. I stopped next to a stone bench, trying to catch my breath, hugging myself tightly as if to fight off an invisible chill. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just a teenage prank or some weird art show. But my instincts say otherwise. There's something about that scene, the open purse, the candles, the circles, that's disturbingly ritualistic, designed to unsettle anyone who stumbles across it. The next day, I tried to forget the incident. But as afternoon fell, an inexplicable urge pulled me back to the park. I don't want fear to win. I need to prove that I can face it. This time, I didn't go on that trail anymore, but ran on the familiar asphalt road. It was a light drizzle. The road surface sparkled under the yellow light. My running was steady, but the memory of the wallet and the candles still haunted my mind. And sure enough, as soon as I passed the entrance to that scary trail, another cold wave of fear hit me. My heart was beating wildly. I smelled a strange scent in the air, like smoke, but with a sharp metallic taste, like flint that had just been struck on steel. I stopped, looked around. Not a single person in sight, but the feeling of being watched goes deep into my bones. That night, I didn't see any more objects, but the feeling of being invisibly watched was even worse. I heard a soft rustling sound behind me, like a second set of footsteps trying to keep up with my running pace, always half a beat slower. I turned around. There was only darkness and silent trees. My chest tightened. It felt like the park itself was teasing me, slowly revealing its dark secrets. In the following days, fear began to take over my life. I became paranoid, startled by the slightest noises. My sleep was fitful, filled with nightmares of candlelit rituals in the woods, of faceless figures gathering in circles. I woke up with my shirt soaked in sweat, my heart beating like it was about to explode. I found myself always smelling that metallic fume or a strong copper smell every time I approached the trail area, even during the day. One afternoon, determined to face my fear, I went into the park early, when the sun had still not completely set. I didn't take the main trail, but tried a different entrance, hoping to approach the area from a different angle. My heart pounded as I realized the faint circles on the ground were still there. Burnt pieces of candles were scattered about. And there was a new object, a small glass bottle containing a cloudy liquid, emitting a faint iron smell. My stomach turned. I feel dizzy and short of breath. The surrounding trees were eerily silent. Then I saw it. Carved into the bark of a large oak tree nearby were a series of strange symbols, interlocking spirals, like circles on the ground. A wave of dizziness hit me and I had to hold on to the tree trunk. The metallic smell became strong, attacking my sense of smell. A A small movement at the corner of my eye made me jump. I'm back. A faint shape, tall and thin, had just hidden behind a thick bush. I couldn't see the details, just a fleeting impression. My heart felt like it wanted to stop beating. Despite my terror, I tremblingly walked towards that bush. Sweat dripped to the ground. My whole body trembled. The area became deathly silent. No birds singing, no leaves rustling. There was only the sound of my panting and the pounding of my pulse in my ears. Another shape flashed at the edge of vision. I turned around. Nothing. I realized I was standing right in the middle of the circles on the ground, as if I had been lured into them. The feeling of being surrounded by invisible watchers flared up violently. My brain felt like it was about to explode from panic. That unpleasant smell became stronger and stronger, almost suffocating me. With a jolt of adrenaline, I turned and took off. I sprinted back to the main road, ignoring the sharp pain in my legs and the burning sensation in my lungs. The shadows under the streetlights seemed to be stretching out, trying to grab me. I heard chaotic footsteps behind me, sometimes near and then far, but I didn't dare look back. Finally, I escaped that area and fell onto a stone bench, out of breath. The park seemed empty, leaving only me and my utter terror. I looked towards the darkness I had just escaped, half expecting to see a figure stepping into the light. But nothing. There was just the cold feeling that something was still lurking out there, watching me with a malevolent silence. From that day on, I never went back to that trail again. I still jog in the park, but only during the day in crowded areas and never near the places that hide those dark secrets. But the obsession is still there. Occasionally, I still smell a strange scent wafting in the wind, or catch a glimpse of a strange shape on the grass, and my heart flutters again. The memory of that suffocating fear is a constant reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed, and that the line between the normal and the inexplicable is very thin indeed. This park, which I once considered a peaceful place, now takes on a different face at sunset, a place where shadows are always lurking and waiting. My experiences at the office building and the haunting park left me longing for even more radical change. I needed a place completely secluded, a place where the noise and ghosts of the city couldn't reach me. An opportunity came from a distant relative I barely knew. They needed someone to look after an old, rather isolated farm in a remote rural area for a while. It sounds perfect. Quiet place, fresh air, and nothing but rolling fields. But from the first moment I stepped out of the car at the farm, an uneasy feeling swept over me. The air here was heavy, pressing against my chest in an oppressive way, as if an invisible hand was trying to push me back onto the road. The dirt road leading to the farm was eerily silent. No wind sound, no insect sound. There was only an almost artificial stillness, a weighty silence. The main house is old, the walls are moldy, and the paint is peeling. The furniture inside is sparse and rickety. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of mold. Outside, the farmland stretches with low-growing weeds, ending in a ramshackle fence. There was a small, dilapidated barn and a few stunted fruit trees. Everything seemed normal, even dull, but the feeling of being watched returned immediately. I kept turning around, convinced that someone or something was standing behind me, but only saw emptiness. One morning, an elderly man from a neighboring village brought some fresh vegetables. He cautiously said that the surrounding community stayed away from this agricultural land at night. He spoke vaguely of an unexplained fear that enveloped the place every time dusk fell. Many families have tried to live here for generations, but no one has stayed long. When I tried to ask for details, he just waved his hand, muttering that it was just a superstition in the countryside, but his eyes clearly showed reluctance and worry. There is a rumor, he whispered, that this very land drives away people after sunset. I soon noticed strange things. The most annoying thing is the outside lighting system. All the light bulbs on the porch, along the fence, near the barn burned out or broke within days of my arrival, sometimes overnight. At first, I thought it was due to old wires. I carefully replaced the light bulb with a new one, and even replaced part of the wiring. But the problem still persists. Every evening, I flip the switch, watch them glow for a moment, then inevitably one or two will go out or flicker wildly before burning black. Even portable flashlights using extension cords have the same problem. The strange thing is that the lights inside the house work completely normally. It felt like there was something outside that didn't want light, as if the land itself wanted uninterrupted darkness. Before long, I began to dread simple evening tasks. Checking the gate, closing the barn door, securing loose boards on the barn. The feeling of being watched was always worst at dusk, as if the farm were a sleeping animal slowly waking up. I often stood at the edge of the yard, holding a flashlight tightly, my heart beating so loudly that it echoed in my ears. I started hearing strange noises at night, especially near the barn. It was not the sound of ordinary human or animal footsteps. It sounded like the slow, careful dragging of dry grass, or the gentle but persistent scratching of the ground. Every time I shine my flashlight toward the sound, scanning the area, I never see anything. There was only deep darkness and the feeling that it just backed away, disappearing into the shadows, waiting for me to turn away. My sleep became restless again. I locked every door and window, checked the latches several times, but the feeling of being exposed in the vast expanse of land remained undiminished. I often woke up before dawn, drenched in cold sweat, convinced that something was in the house with me. The floorboards creaked in the hallway, even though I was sure I was the only one here. The local woman who occasionally brings groceries also confirmed people's fears. She explained that people believe the area has a heavy atmosphere that gets thicker as night falls. She refused to enter the farm grounds after late afternoon and always appeared to be in a hurry to leave before it was completely dark. She said that previous caretakers never stayed long, especially when they started hearing voices or seeing shadows passing near the fence. Her words were a clumsily veiled warning. I understand that, if something happens at night, no one will come to help me. My confidence gradually dwindled. This farm has an underlying hostility. My mind started playing tricks on me. Every time the sun begins to set, a knot forms in my stomach. Palms are wet with sweat. During the long hours of darkness, the slightest sound was enough to cause a panic attack. The groan of rotting wood, the rustling of leaves, the vague scratching that seemed to come from the ground itself. My eyes created shapes out of the darkness. One evening, the tension reached its peak. I had just finished checking the barn, trying to ignore the heavy feeling in my chest. The lights outside turned off again, leaving only the weak light from the flashlight in my hand and the ghostly silver moonlight covering the scene. As I closed the barn gate, I heard a very clear scratching sound in the tall grass to the left. It sounded like sharp nails scratching hard on dry ground. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I froze in place, my heart beating so violently that my vision blurred. I forced myself to shine my flashlight in that direction. The beam of light cut through the grass, revealing nothing but empty air and a few rocks. I trembled and stepped closer, panting for breath. But I don't see anything. The scratching continued, this time seeming to circle behind me, just out of reach of the flashlight. It moved, forming a slow, careful circle around me, always keeping its distance, always in the shadows. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. My hands were shaking so much that the flashlight beam danced wildly. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry. Only a choked whisper came out. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I turned around and rushed towards the house, slamming the door behind me as if there was a real animal chasing me. Inside, I collapsed onto the old couch, my chest heaving, cold sweat flowing. I sat in the dark, not daring to turn on the light, straining my ears to listen. I waited for that terrible scratching sound to reach the front door, but only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat echoed in the silence. When I regained some composure and turned on a weak light, everything in the living room looked normal: peeling walls, dusty floors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering just beyond the walls, an entity whose presence permeated the night air with pure fear. I considered leaving immediately, but part of me remained stubborn, not wanting to be seen as a quitter, plus a morbid curiosity to understand what's going on. But the nightmares and paranoia grew worse. I became too sensitive to everything. One afternoon, I resolved to try again to fix the outdoor wiring, convinced that there had to be a reasonable explanation. I spent hours meticulously running the new cable, carefully grounding it. But to no avail. When dusk fell, the lights burned for only a minute before going out again in a shower of sparks. Frustration and fear choked me. This land clearly does not want light. And then, just as the last rays of daylight faded, as darkness completely consumed the farm, I heard the floorboards groan right behind me, inside the house. My heart seemed to stop beating. I pointed the flashlight toward the dark corner near the kitchen. For an extremely brief moment, I swore I saw it. A tall, dark figure, standing motionless in the corner of the room, before disappearing into the darkness. That was the last straw. For the first time, I was completely convinced that whatever was haunting this place didn't just exist in my mind. It was real, and it was bending physical reality to keep me in a state of terror. That night, I almost didn't sleep. My mind replayed all the strange events over and over again. As dawn broke, I made a decision. This farm wants to be left alone in its darkness, and I will not fight that silent hostility anymore. My safety, both physical and mental, was no longer guaranteed. Early in the morning, I hastily packed up my few belongings, my hands still shaking, always waiting for something to burst through the door. The oppressive air seemed to throb around me stronger than ever, as if it knew I was about to leave. There were no dramatic confrontations. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the house in a dull, almost peaceful way. The farm looked normal in the daylight, but I still feel that invisible power waiting, lurking at the edge of reality, waiting for the night to return. As I drove off that dirt road, a feeling of relief washed over me, as if a heavy blanket had been lifted off my shoulders. But I know it's not over yet. I was out of its reach, at least for now. I can't say for certain what lurks on that farm. Perhaps there is a haunting presence attached to the land, or some phenomenon that distorts perception and breeds fear. But the terror I felt was real. That farm is still there, empty, a place no one dares to stay after sunset. And I know whatever roams that land has not disappeared. It's still there, crouching in the darkness, reclaiming the night for itself. I escaped, but part of my courage stayed there, haunted by the knowledge that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see, but the suffocating feeling that something is watching you, just waiting for the lights to go out. After fleeing the isolated farm, I returned to the city, hoping to find normalcy and anonymity among the crowds. I rented another cramped one-bedroom apartment, tried to rebuild my life, and focused on my job at a marketing company, even though memories of those haunted places still lingered. I told myself that these were just coincidences, hallucinations caused by stress and fatigue. But then, it started again. One Sunday night, I suddenly woke up, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed a sickly blue number, 2:42 a.m. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, like someone was using a hammer to pound on my chest from the inside. The room was pitch black, a darkness heavier than usual, as if it had weight and was weighing me down. My breath caught, and I feel it, a presence right next to the bed. I couldn't see anything, just a vague outline at the corner of my eye, a certain feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to reach out and turn on the light, but my arms seemed frozen, not obeying orders. My mind was fully awake, but my body was trapped, bound by an invisible force. It took me a few seconds of struggling and panic before I stood up. The room was empty, but primal fear made my skin tingle. After that night, waking up around 2:40 to 2:45 a.m. became a grim pattern. Always a feeling of intense fear, sometimes accompanied by temporary paralysis, and always a feeling of that presence. The accompanying nightmares also become more disturbing. I don't remember the details, but I always had the feeling of being watched by a figure standing next to the bed, or by the window or near the door. Every time I tried to focus on that shape in my dream, it disappeared like smoke. At first, I tried to blame it on work stress and insomnia. I tried herbal tea and listening to relaxing music, but to no avail. Every night, the pattern repeats itself. Then strange things started happening in the apartment itself. The overhead light in the kitchen occasionally flickers briefly, even though the bulb is new. The corners of the room seemed unusually darker at night, even when I turned on all the lights. Occasionally, I heard a faint creak from the ceiling at night, even though I was sure the upper floor was uninhabited. My electronic devices also started malfunctioning. The alarm on my phone didn't go off on time twice. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I saw my phone screen suddenly light up at exactly 2:41 a.m., displaying swirling streaks of static for a second before returning to normal. In that brief moment of turbulence, I felt like I saw a pair of eyes blinking, but I couldn't be sure. Desperate, I decided to install a webcam in the bedroom, aimed directly at the bed, and put an old phone to record on the nightstand. I hoped to be able to gather evidence either there's nothing there, or at least a glimpse of what it looks like. The first night of testing, I woke up as usual around 2:44 a.m. The air in the room was unusually warm, almost stuffy. I heard the faint hiss of static, perhaps from the phone's microphone. My body resisted movement again. I could only tilt my head slightly. My eyes met the red recording indicator light on the webcam. Flashed once, twice, then turned off. Panic rising, I got up and turned on the light. The room was empty. The next morning, I checked the logs. Both video and audio are corrupted. The webcam recording is a mess of blue and purple lines. The audio file was just a long, thick crackle, with an extremely brief moment of what sounded like a whisper, but the words were indistinguishable. I tried again many nights in a row, even changed the camera, but the results were still the same. Video or audio always breaks right at that sensitive time. It felt like something was deliberately sabotaging my efforts, which both made me angry and made me more afraid. I tried talking to the homeowner about the electrical problems. He brushed it off, saying the building's electrical wiring was old and assured him it wasn't dangerous. When I asked about the history of the apartment, he just smiled politely and changed the subject. I have a feeling he's hiding something. Paranoia began to creep in during the day. I felt movement out of the corner of my eye while I was working, startled by my own reflection on the computer screen. Sometimes, I smell a faint scent of damp earth or rotting wood that then disappears. I don't eat well, don't sleep well, and I'm always in a state of stress and alertness. At night, I often hear strange, rattling sounds coming from the bedroom. One time, the noise was so loud that I had to pause the movie I was watching to go check. Heart pounding, I opened the bedroom door, half expecting to find an intruder, but the room was empty. However, as soon as I entered, an oppressive feeling weighed heavily on my shoulders. My head was spinning, my legs were weak. My reflection in the mirror across from me looked pale and unfamiliar. The feeling of being watched hit me so hard that I staggered back, hastily closing the door as if I could trap the presence inside. Determined to break the vicious cycle, I rearranged the furniture in the bedroom, moved the bed away from the window, and placed a small lamp on the wardrobe in the hope that the light would dispel the darkness. That night, I tried to go to bed early, longing for a peaceful sleep. But then, my eyes opened again shortly after 2:40 a.m. Familiar fear clawed at my chest. The new lamp is radiating warm yellow light. For a moment, I felt some hope, but then I heard breathing. Not mine. A soft, wheezing sound, right next to my ear, just a few centimeters away. My scalp felt like pins and needles. I tried to turn my head towards the sound, but my body refused to obey. The light of the lamp began to flicker, fading with my increasing heartbeat. Felt like something was draining the light from the room. With each flicker, the corners of the room grew darker. Then in that flickering darkness, I saw it. A line near the wardrobe. Not really a person. The shape was tall, thin, slender, but bent at unnatural angles, as if folded out of darkness. The darkness around it seemed to pulsate. I blinked, trying to see more clearly, but it was still just a weak, swaying shadow. I wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. With a last effort of will, I yanked my arm out of paralysis, slamming it against the main light switch. Light filled the room. That shape disappeared. I jumped up, my whole body shaking, staring at the empty space next to the wardrobe. My breath was panting. The memory of that deformed figure haunted my mind, even when I closed my eyes. I knew I had to do something more drastic. I bought a new recording system with infrared capabilities and added small motion sensor lights around the bed. I decided to stay up all night and face it at that fateful hour. I brewed black coffee constantly, trying to fight off sleepiness. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. My heart was pounding from the caffeine. Every little noise in the building made me jump. The bedroom door was wide open, and I sat on a chair in the living room, staring into the dark hallway.
2:30 Uhr nachts.
My stomach churned with fear. Palms are wet. My eyes burned.
2:40 Uhr nachts.
A feeling of extreme fear prevailed, as if the air had changed density. Living room lights flicker. The sound of static electricity comes from the camera screen on the laptop. My breath caught. One of the motion sensor lights in the bedroom lit up for a split second, then went out. There was no sound, but my heart was beating so hard it hurt. I stood up, each step towards the bedroom hallway feeling like I was moving towards an abyss. The second sensor light came on, illuminating the hallway with a shaky light. The pitch-black bedroom doorway appeared before my eyes. My legs were shaking, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I still moved forward. I walked across the threshold. The darkness in the bedroom seemed to be swirling. My chest tightened. I couldn't take a deep breath. I looked towards the wardrobe. That dark corner seemed to shift slightly, just the slightest ripple of darkness, as if an empty void was standing there, waiting. A cold wave hit me so violently that it made my teeth chatter. My vision blurred. I staggered back a step. At that moment, all the sensor lights came on at once, filling the hallway with a harsh, unnatural white light. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and keys, rushed out of the apartment, sprinted down the stairs, and out of the building. I spent the rest of the night in my car parked a few blocks away, shivering uncontrollably, watching the sky slowly change color as dawn came. Several days have passed since that terrible night. I don't dare go back to sleeping in the apartment yet. Every time the clock approaches 2:40 a.m., no matter where I am, my stomach churns. I considered moving, but another fear arose. Would it follow me? Is the apartment just the place where it manifests most clearly? But in reality, it has been clinging to me for a long time. I didn't know what I was dealing with, a spirit, an entity, or just my own mental breakdown. But the fear is real. The memory of that deformed figure was too vivid. I planned to go back to the apartment for a while to get more things, but I didn't know if I had the courage to face that dark corner again. Even now, as I tell this story, my hands still shake. My breathing is shallow. It felt like the very act of remembering was poisoning the surrounding air. I can't escape the feeling that it's still out there, or perhaps it's still here right next door, just waiting for the right moment, waiting for the lights to go out, to remind me that there are horrors that cannot be recorded, that cannot be explained, and that cannot be escaped. The spiral of fear seems to have no end. The silence was overwhelming, so thick it could almost be felt. There was only the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere in the house, a lonely rhythm in the darkness. I lay there, between sleepiness and wakefulness, my body heavy, my mind floating. It was at this most vulnerable moment, when the lines between reality and fantasy blurred, that it happened. Knock, knock, knock. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest like a bird trapped in a cage. A sudden and shrill sound rang out from behind the wall next to my bed. It was not the usual sound of an old house sinking, nor was it the distant echo of wooden slats adjusting themselves in the night. No, these were 3 separate knocks, deliberately spaced perfectly and coldly. It was as if someone or something was tapping the plaster with its knuckles in a carefully calculated rhythm. My mind, still groggy from sleep, teetered between confusion and slowly building fear. This isn't the first time I've heard it. Strange noises in the night have become an unwanted part of my life since I moved into this house. But tonight is different. Felt private, like a signal, a plea just for you. The silence of the early morning, now broken by my own quick, labored breathing, added to the tension. Every little rustle of the bedsheets, Every creak of the floor somewhere far away rang like thunder in my ears. I felt trapped by the sound, pinned to the bed by the fear coiling in my chest. My heart was pounding so hard that I could almost hear the rush of blood echoing in my ears. I have never been a particularly superstitious person. I always try to find a reasonable explanation for everything. But on nights like this, faced with the inexplicable, I realize I was unprepared for anything that went against common logic. My bedroom is not big. The wall that made the knocking sound was just an arm's length away from the edge of my bed. It is a standard partition wall, made of plasterboard, separating the bedroom from the dusty space behind. It was originally designed to hold seasonal items, but over the years it has become a forgotten space where I throw away old boxes and rarely used items. A place that, until now, I almost never thought about. When the knocking started happening a few weeks ago, I tried to rationalize it. Is the house sinking? Broken water pipes? Could it be that rats are making a nest? But every time I hear it, that three-tap pattern is so steady, so intentional. It's not random. Early that morning, driven by morbid curiosity and simmering fear, I did something I now deeply regret. With shaking hands, I decided to answer. I raised my hand and tapped the wall 3 times, trying to accurately copy the rhythm I had just heard. Knock, knock, knock. The silence lasted for a heartbeat. And then, knock, knock, knock. The answer came immediately. 3 identical knocks sounded from the other side. A terrible electric current ran down my spine, making my legs stiff under the thin blanket. My throat was choked. I couldn't speak. Every instinct in me told me to lie still, pretend to be dead, close my eyes and pray it would pass. But another part, darker and more curious, won out. I groggily sat up, my hands trembling as I turned on the night light on the nightstand. Yellow light suddenly filled the room, both comforting and cruelly intrusive. It illuminates every corner of my somewhat messy bedroom, but doesn't offer any explanation for the sound. The knocking stopped, leaving only my panting and panicked breathing echoing in the air. For the next few hours, until the first faint rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, the lights on. Part of me still clung to the idea that the whole thing had been a half-dream, the product of an overactive imagination brought on by lack of sleep and stress. But no, my senses were too alert, too raw. The coldness of fear was still there, and the memory of my immediate reaction to the knock on the door was too clear to deny. As daylight poured in, bringing with it some false courage, I got dressed. I must know. I had to see it with my own eyes. The entrance to the storage area is in the hallway, through a narrow, rickety door. I pushed the door open. The air was stagnant and the smell of dust filled my nose. The light from the hallway only illuminates a small part of the cramped space inside. I groped for the light switch, but the light bulb didn't work. There was only darkness and the vague outline of boxes stacked on top of each other. I pushed the old boxes and broken furniture aside, creating a small passage. Dust flies in the air. Finally, I stood where I estimated to be right behind the bedroom wall, where my bed was on the other side. Nothing. It was just an empty corner full of dust and spider webs hanging like funeral curtains. There were no signs of disturbance at all. There were no footprints in the thick layer of dust. There was no sign that a living creature might have been standing there, knocking on the wall just hours ago. The wall looks sturdy. The floor is intact. There are no secret passages, no hidden doors. I stood there, in the cramped space, feeling confused and frustrated. What is the reasonable explanation for what I experienced? But then the memory of that interaction, the knock responding to the knock, returned. Can't be random. That morning, as I sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee with my hands still shaking slightly, my mind raced for an explanation. Pipeline? Ventilation system? Can sound from a neighbor's house pass through the wall? But this house is located quite isolated, and the typing style is very precise, very human-like. A cold feeling of paranoia began to creep into my mind, the kind that makes you look back even in the seemingly safe safety of your own home. I tried to tell myself that the mind can play cruel tricks in the silence of the night, but the still small voice of reason, or perhaps instinct, refused to be silenced. He knew something was wrong. During the following days, I tried to maintain a normal appearance. I go to work, perform daily tasks mechanically, but my mind always returns to that wall. Every evening, as the sun sets and darkness falls, a dull anxiety rises in my stomach, heavy as lead. I try to stay up late, read books, watch movies, do anything to distract myself, hoping that if I didn't sleep I wouldn't hear that knock on the door. But fatigue always wins. And nearly every morning, in the quietest hour before dawn, when the whole world seems to hold its breath, it wakes me up. Knock, knock, knock. Then there was a short silence. Knock, knock, knock. My heart was beating like thunder in my chest again. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Sometimes, I can feel the pulse in my neck so strong it's almost painful. I lay there, curled up, my muscles tense, my eyes glued to the wall as if I were looking through plaster. More than once, in a fit of desperation or morbid curiosity, I forced myself to reach out, pressing my palm against the cold, smooth surface of the wall, half in anticipation, half in fear as I felt a pressure response from the other side. But that never happened. The wall surface remained cold and motionless. Just those tapping noises continued, never random, always following a haunting pattern that reminded me of some kind of code. A message I couldn't decipher and didn't dare decode. I try not to answer anymore. I told myself that ignoring it might make it go away. But the urge to communicate, to confront, to understand what is doing this, gnaws at me from the inside. On the third night since I made the mistake of knocking again, the knocking increased in intensity. Instead of 3 steady knocks, there were 5 rapid knocks. Knock, 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 knock. It was as if whoever or whatever on the other side of the wall had grown impatient, even angry. The sound was stronger, more violent, no longer like lightly tapping with a knuckle, but like someone punching a wall with a fist. This time I couldn't hold it anymore. I pressed my ear against the cold plaster. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The noise was uncomfortably close, as if only a thin layer of matter separated me from a presence I did not want to face. It's too close, too real. I didn't dare respond. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear, my breath gasping, caught in my chest. My thoughts raced between rational and irrational explanations, with growing desperation. Is wind trapped in the vent? But why does the wind knock on the door in such a deliberate rhythm? There is no reasonable explanation. Nothing about this situation fits the normal reality that I know. Exhaustion and fear seemed to be conspiring against me. I felt a chill run through my body, a terrifying feeling that the wall was no longer an inanimate object. It's alive, and something was pressing against it from the other side, desperate to be pushed through, desperate to get into my room. I started avoiding storage space altogether, even during the day. The thought of entering that dark, cramped room again made me nauseous. During the day, with the sunlight shining and the familiar sounds of everyday life, I feel a little safer, but fear still lingers at the edge of my mind, waiting for night to fall. At work, I try to mention unusual noises in the house to colleagues, but only in vague, objective terms. Strange noises on the wall, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I left out details about rhythm, about touch interaction. I don't want to be thought crazy. My colleague, with good intentions, suggested it might be an old plumbing or ventilation system problem. I nodded in agreement, feigning relief, even though deep down I knew it was more than that. That weekend, I mustered up all my remaining courage. I can't live in this fear forever. I need to re-examine the storage area more systematically and thoroughly. I stayed in there for hours, pulling out each dusty box, shining a flashlight into every dark corner. The stuffy air almost suffocated me. My hands trembled every time I pushed the thick cobwebs aside. My nerves were so tense that every creak of the floor under my feet startled me. Finally, after many tiring and stressful hours of searching, the result was the same. There's nothing unusual, only my own forgotten trash. There were no suspicious cracks in the walls, no secret compartments, no signs that something or someone might exist in that space. When I finished, my skin was drenched in cold sweat and my heart was beating like a drum. But I don't feel any closer to understanding the truth. Actually, not finding anything scared me even more. It eliminates the possibility of a tangible, albeit terrifying, explanation. That night, I tried to go to sleep with false peace of mind, having at least confirmed that there were no flesh and blood intruders lurking behind the wall. But that peace did not last long. Around 2 a.m., I was awakened by a loud and violent banging on the wall. This time, it wasn't just a tap or a punch. It was a strong blow, enough to shake even the fragile plaster wall. Its frequency and force have increased significantly. It's no longer a code. It was an attack. My whole body stiffened. My throat is as dry as a desert. The feeling of being watched and hunted became overwhelming. I fumbled for the nightlight switch on the nightstand, but my hands were shaking so much that I knocked the lamp onto the floor with a rattling sound. For a few terrifying seconds, I was in complete darkness, with nothing but my own gasps and the loud, menacing sound of hitting the wall next to me. Finally, in a panic, I found the ceiling light switch and turned it on. Bright white light filled the room. Immediately, the pounding stopped, as suddenly as if it had been cut off. The sudden silence should have calmed me, but instead my eyes were glued to a spot on the wall. A bulge. Very subtle, but definitely there. It's not quite as flat as the rest. It looks like the plaster has curved outward slightly from the back. My breath caught. It always looks like that and I don't notice? Or is it new? What are the consequences of recent beatings? I was afraid to investigate further, afraid to confirm that something was really pushing from the inside, trying to get through. My rational mind screamed that it must be an optical illusion, or just my imagination gone wild after a panic attack. But I couldn't ignore the fear twisting inside me, my instincts telling me that the wall was weakening, and something was coming closer. In the days that followed, my paranoia deepened. I'm not just afraid of the bedroom wall anymore. The whole house seemed to become hostile. I began to see glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow passing through the doorway, a dark shape flickering in the hallway mirror. When I lay in bed, even during the day, I could swear I heard faint rubbing sounds along the baseboards, faint, almost inaudible, as if coming from the next room, or even from under the floor. My heart rate spiked every time these feelings overtook me, and I froze, waiting for something to happen, for a presence to be revealed. But then, the house fell silent again, leaving me alone with my racing heart and doubts about my own sanity. I started sleeping with the TV in the living room, hoping the low, rumbling hum of late-night shows would drown out any noise from the bedroom. But it doesn't work. I still hear it, sometimes softer, muffled by the sound of the television. But it's definitely still there. Knock, knock, knock. My heart tightened more and more. My palms sweated. It was difficult to grip the blanket tightly. I felt the suffocating panic of someone trapped in a nightmare from which they cannot wake. I found myself gradually losing my sense of time, drifting into a state of semi-consciousness, full of anxiety. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked haggard, with deep dark circles under my eyes. My coworkers started politely asking if I was okay, if I was well rested. I just shook my head, giving evasive answers. How can I explain? Late one evening, fueled by a combination of intense frustration and a shock of adrenaline, I decided I had to have proof. I need to know if I'm really going crazy or not. I placed my phone on the nightstand, turned on the recording app, and lay down on the bed, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. For a long while there was only silence broken by the faint hum of the refrigerator coming from the kitchen and the natural creaks of the hovel. But then, after midnight, it started. Knock, knock, knock. Sharp and unmistakable. My breath caught. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. I forced myself to lie still, resisting every urge to jump up and turn on the light. The knocking continued intermittently for several minutes. When I finally played back the recording the next day, the sound was so clear that the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Those knocks are recorded perfectly. But there's another thing. In the background of the recording, amid the silence of the tapping, there were faint clicking and hissing sounds that I hadn't noticed last night. It's not like the noise of a house or a pipe. It was like many sounds overlapping each other, almost like breathing, forming a harsh chorus of unnatural sounds. At that moment, I knew I couldn't face this on my own anymore, but I wasn't ready to admit the whole truth to someone else. I contacted a local repairman I knew, citing a possible structural issue with the wall. I said I was concerned about potential cracks or something unusual behind the drywall. He stopped by in the afternoon, did a preliminary inspection. He tapped the wall, listened, used a stud detector. He found no signs of damage, no signs of insects or rodents. Everything looks normal, he concluded, looking at me with slight curiosity. Trying not to sound paranoid, I explained the unusual noises, suggesting that maybe a loose water pipe was causing the rhythmic noise. He tapped on the wall a few more times, listened with somewhat perfunctory interest, and then concluded that perhaps it was just the strangeness of an old house. He said that old houses often have strange noises. I didn't have the courage to tell him the truth, that the knock on the door responds with a code, that sometimes they are so strong that they shake the walls, that I heard other sounds in the recording. He packed his things, gave me an invoice for his time, and left me alone with my confusion and growing fear. That night, as the witching hour approached, the tension in my body was almost unbearable. My breathing became rapid. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. And then, the knocking started again, more intense than ever. Smack, smack, smack. The wall literally shook under the impact of the blows. My bed frame shook. My eyes were glued to the subtle bulge in the drywall. It seemed larger than before, clearer, as if it had expanded a little more under pressure from within. My throat was dry, cold sweat ran down my spine. My heart was beating so hard that I was actually afraid it might stop from the exertion. In a moment of mad determination, I pushed the nightstand aside, completely exposing the affected wall. I stood right next to it. My hand reached out, shaking so violently that I could feel the trembling all the way to my elbow. I pressed my palm against the bulge. The surface is cold and scary solid. It was as if there was something harder than regular rivets lying right behind the fragile plaster. And then I felt it, a gentle, rhythmic vibration, right under my palm, perfectly synchronized with my rapidly beating heart. The wall seemed to have its own pulse. My mind was spinning. I can't think clearly. I wondered about my own sanity. Am I hallucinating due to lack of sleep and extreme fear? But every time doubt tried to creep in, a louder thump sounded, taunting my doubts. I felt certain, a terrifying certainty, that this presence was not a product of my mind. It's real. Whether it is supernatural or some distorted spiritual echo, it is still there and determined to overcome it. At that moment, every survival instinct in me screamed, "Leave! Run now!" I rushed out of the bedroom, turning on all the lights on my way through the hallway. My whole body trembled uncontrollably. I retreated into the living room, standing next to the front door, keys in hand, not knowing whether to run into the night or try to stay in my house. As I stood there, heart pounding, I swear I heard a faint scratching sound, moving along the inside wall, as if it were following me into the living room. The thought that it wasn't just limited to the bedroom, but that it was hunting me in my own home, made me almost drop the keys in terror. Finally, after several minutes of standing motionless in fear, I regained my composure. I can't run away with nothing. My plan was simple. Go back to the bedroom, grab a few essentials: wallet, phone, car keys, and drive to the nearest motel. At least for tonight. Returning to the hallway that leads to the bedroom feels like entering a predator's lair. The light from the living room cast long, dancing shadows. Every step made the floor cry out in pain and complaint. I could taste the bitter taste of fear in my throat. My mouth was dry, my tongue was swollen. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever in my imagination, turning each step into torture. My breathing became rapid and panting as I finally reached the bedroom door. I gently pushed the door. Inside, silence reigns. A heavy, suffocating silence, almost more terrifying than the pounding from before. There was no knocking on the door. There is no vibration. Even the bulge in the wall looks fainter? Or perhaps my eyes are playing tricks on me in low light. The air was thick, filled with a hidden threat, a tense anticipation. I quickly grabbed some clothes, my phone, a charger, and a few toiletries, stuffing them into my bag. I tried to avoid looking directly at that wall, but the urge to confront it, to see if it's still there, if anything has changed, is very strong. My stomach churned with fear. Finally, I forced myself to glance. The wall is still intact.
No cracks, no oles.
The bulge seemed to have shrunk, almost beyond recognition. But the feeling of being watched is still there, persistent, as if some sinister existence is still lurking just behind the thin layer of plaster, watching, waiting. I left the house immediately after, my heart still pounding in my chest. The motel's bright fluorescent lights and bland, lifeless decor provided a temporary escape from the horror that had ingrained itself in my mind. But it's only temporary. Even there, in this unfamiliar room, I found myself glancing nervously at the walls. I tried to calm myself by reasoning that if that knocking sound was some strange phenomenon associated with the house, with that location, then perhaps it would disappear while I was away. But the remaining tension refused to subside. My hands were still shaking uncontrollably as I struggled to insert the key into the motel lock. I checked the lock 3 times before feeling secure. I kind of expected to hear that familiar code on the motel wall, as if it could follow me anywhere. That night, I lay on the hard mattress, the lights still on, listening to every slightest noise from outside, the hum of traffic in the distance, the sound of a door closing somewhere in the hallway. Although the motel is noisy in its own way, it is of interest in other aspects. I tried to find comfort in that relative silence, but the memory of the strong beats, the feeling of shaking under my hands, kept echoing in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that cold plaster, remembering the unnatural vibrations that seemed to respond to my own fear. Sleep came, disturbed by racing thoughts and terrifying images. Coming to Bin Min, I found myself torn. Part of me wanted to sell that house immediately, run as far away as possible and never look back. But a part, a stubborn and perhaps stupid part, wants to reclaim his life, reclaim his home. I cannot let invisible fear control my life. The thought returned and made me feel nauseous with anxiety. But I also felt that if I ran away now, the thing behind that wall would always haunt me. An unresolved nightmare. A ghost lingering at the edge of my mind forever. I needed some closure, an answer, even if it meant facing a presence I couldn't understand. I still haven't solved the mystery of that night's knocking on the door. But I took the first step by at least admitting to myself that something beyond conventional explanations was inhabiting the space behind that wall. I couldn't be sure if it was a manifestation of my own fears, a supernatural entity, or something else entirely. All I know is that it's waiting in the dark, in that house. It's calling me through encrypted touches. With each passing night, the fear returned, but with it came a flicker of determination. I was standing on the threshold of something unimaginable, aware that my next step could determine my relationship with this invisible force. My only hope is that I can outlast it, that my vigilance will stand while the wall still stands. And if it can penetrate, if one day I find myself face to face with whatever is hidden behind that layer of plaster, I can only pray that I am ready to face what logic refuses to name. Because even when I tried to escape, I still suspected that I would never really leave it behind. Found me, and part of me fear it will always come to me. I returned to the house. That decision was not easy. Every step into the familiar house made my heart pound. But I could not live forever in the hotel in the fear of escaping. I need to face it. However, that night I came home, I had a strange feeling of stress, a feeling that didn't directly relate it to the bedroom wall. My chest tightened as if there was some invisible heavy object. The atmosphere outside was incredibly quiet. No wind, no noise far away, nothing. Only my own pounding heart sounded in my ear. I opened the door inside. My heart pounded for some reason that I still could not determine it clearly. Almost immediately, I felt something was wrong. The living room is darker than usual, even if I have turned on the light, as if the darkness becomes thicker and more tangible after my short absence. My breathing became more urgent, uncomfortable, familiar because I was not alone to invade me alone. It was when I turned to the big window to look back to the backyard. And I saw it. A mark. It has a clear hand-shaped hand, pressing hard from the inside, palms towards him. But its color is completely misleading. It is not a regular fingerprint but has a gray, dull, almost moist tone. Looks like mud or ash than some traces of flesh. I froze, hesitated. A chill ran along his spine. I slowly put my hand out, gently touching the glass right next to the seal. Cold glass. Then took the courage. I touched that mark. A terrible cold feeling through the tip of my finger made me twitch like burning. It was so cold that it was almost sticky, reminiscent of the humid soil in a cold winter day, or worse than something of the graveyard, the decay. My heart stopped beating and beat again. I felt cold sweat running along the temple. For a long time I could not move. My legs froze on the floor. The shape of that hand is worrying. The palm of the hand seems unusual, the slender fingers but full of obsession, not completely balanced. I can see the dim lines on the mark, as if the flesh itself was pressed into the glass with a strange level of detail, but there was still something wrong. I quickly glanced around the lack of light, half expected, half fear, and would see someone bent in the dark corner. But the living room was empty. The furniture was still in the position I left. My first instinct was to check the lock, check the door and other windows to make sure there were no intruders. But I just stood there, paralyzed by the only imprint, strange on the glass. In the end, I forced myself to take a deep breath. My mind tries to cling to a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone cried for me? A mischievous neighbor? But how can they get inside? And why leave such a strange impression? I went to the kitchen, took a clean rag and a bottle of glass water. Back to the living room, I spray a towel to wipe the glass on the stain and start cleaning. The stain was blurred at first, leaving a blurry gray streak on the glass. But after that, just a little effort, it disappeared completely under the fabric. I rubbed again and again until there was no trace, leaving only the transparent glass sparkling under the light. My heartbeat finally started to slow down, although my hand was still trembling when gripping the rag. I decided to check all the locks in the house, more careful. Every window is tightly closed. Every door latch is installed. Finally, when I went to bed that night, I almost convinced myself that it was just a bizarre joke or an inexplicable stain due to the condensation of steam or something similar. But I still could not sleep well. The image of that wet gray hand kept coming back, squeezing my window from the inside. The next morning, I woke up with a mild headache due to lack of sleep. A part of me felt relieved when the sunlight through the curtains, making the living room look more normal and more comfortable. But when I walked through the coffee living room, my eyes accidentally glided over that window. I froze. The whole body is cold. The mark has returned. It is in that position on the glass. But it is not entirely the same as last night. This new fingerprint slightly tilted in another corner, almost moved a bit in the night. And the fingers, they seem a bit longer, a little more pointed. Near the tip of the fingers there are blurred marks that look like extremely small scratches on the glass surface. I approached, held my breath, looked closely at the glass, trying to confirm what I was seeing. Yes, can't be mistaken. There are small, slender lines like the hair on the glass surface, right at the tip of the ink. They are so small that they may be confused with small cracks or scratches due to impact, but their location is too coincidental. Whatever it is, it makes my whole body shudder. I took rags and glass water again, trying to wipe it off, this time using more force. The trace was even more stubborn last night, only fading after I rubbed so much that I was worried that I could break the glass. When it disappeared, I took a step back. My breath faded away a small space on the cold glass. The feeling of being monitored again, stronger than before, as if something was waiting right outside my periphery, watching my reaction. Many times that day, I suddenly came back, looking forward to seeing a silhouette. A movement was floating there, but nothing. In the house, there is only silence and familiar objects. Unexpected paranoia began to invade my thoughts, whispering that hand was not just a simple impression. It is a sign, presence. I felt stupid to even consider the possibility of something supernatural. But I couldn't deny the abnormal cold lasting in the air around the window, and I could not explain the appearance and disappearance of traces, or the scratches increasingly clear. That night, I went home earlier than usual, determined to arrest the one or something behind this case. I carefully checked around the house, behind the bush, along the fence. I even indirectly asked a neighbor who saw what they recently noticed anything unusual. They shook their heads, not seeing anything, but in their voices and gaze, something showed that my question was very strange. I can't blame them. I almost trembled from stress. My palms were soaked. My heart pounded in my chest. I could not help but imagine the image of a pale shadow with a gray hand pressing on my window from the inside when I was away. There must be a reasonable explanation, I tell myself, but that explanation is getting more and more distant. At night, and despite all preventive measures, although carefully checked all the windows, I still feel extremely insecure. Every shadow in the living room seems to dance and change the shape when I don't look at them. The highlight of the light blinked once or twice, making my nerves even more stressful. My mouth was dry when I tried to keep my calm, sit on the sofa and try to read. I heard the clogged door knocking or something almost like that from the window, but when I got up to check, nothing. Only quiet darkness outside. Only when I forced myself to return to the sofa, trying to focus on the book, I realized it. Fingerprints are back. At the right place. Almost mocked me. This time, the stain seems darker, almost black. And the scratches at the tip of the fingers are much more pronounced. They actually cut the thin, clear lines into the glass. My body began to tremble without control when a wave of cold fear flooded me, like a stream of ice water on my spine. I was almost unable to breathe, and my heart hit my chest, so big that I thought it could be broken. I pressed my hand in my chest, reminding myself to slow down and steadily, but my gaze still glued to a slender, scary shape on the glass. The border of the palm, the deformed fingers, the sense of hostility and invasive, as if it were gradually owning my space, marking its territory. For some reasons I could not explain, my flesh crawled up when I saw it. This is not a joke. Definitely not. Something wants to enter. Or maybe it was here and this was how it showed its presence. There is something challenging the boundary between the outside and the inside, or perhaps between one world and another, leaving these worrying traces as a warning or a dark invitation. I decided at that time, I have to protect this house, turning it into a fortress. I went to buy locks and patched all the windows, even buying special reinforced bars for sliding windows in the living room. I also invested in a thick, dark, completely bright tarpaulin, and I used it to completely cover the living room window. The idea is to prevent all the ability to see that terrible impression. If I couldn't see it, maybe it would lose my strength for me, maybe I could pretend that it didn't exist. However, in my heart, I suspect that such a simple solution will really work. The feeling of being invaded, the sinister atmosphere accompanied by those fingerprints, will not disappear just because I obscure my opinion. I still feel watched. That night, the living room was immersed in the stifling darkness. Heavy fabric covered the window, making the space become cramped and disappointed. The only light I dared to turn on was a dim table lamp in the corner of the room, but it created a strange darkness than the real light. My breathing echoed in the heavy silence, and the smallest noise, the sound of the rickety water pipes, the sound of the sinking floor, all made my nerves last like a string. My heart rate is not stable. My mind constantly imagined the image of a gray hand sprayed from the other side of the glass, pressing the fabric, pulling its long, unnatural fingers along the fabric surface. I thought I had heard weak scratches, strangled, but whenever I held my breath to listen more carefully, that noise stopped, leaving me alone with silence and fear of gnawing. I could not sleep in the bedroom, where the wall was still a hidden threat. I woke up on the sofa in the dark living room, the blanket pulled up my chin, even though that person was soaked in cold sweat. My body refused to relax, and the blood vessels in the temple were pounding. I was trapped between wanting to draw a picture to check the window and just want to bury myself deeper into the darkness, hoping the ignorance will bring peace. Finally, fear won curiosity. I lay there until the first rays of dawn weakly passed the door, signaling a new worried day. Finally, when I came in the morning, I forced myself to leave the house, trying to do my regular work in the hope of daytime light and busyness that could help me awake. But my mind is still heavy. Instead, I returned home earlier in the afternoon and immediately noticed something different. The fabric covered with a disturbed window. It was slightly hung, and along one side, there was a faint tear, as if something had tried to pull it out. My circuit soared. With my heart hitting my chest, I pulled the cloth to the side. The fingerprint has disappeared, but the rear glass is not intact. It is covered by a network of new scratches, much thicker than before. Scratches fluttering, overlapping, as if there was something or someone with sharp claws that were frantically scratched into the glass from the inside. I felt a terrible current running through the limbs. My mouth was dry, and the feeling of panic increased from the tongue. I tried what I saw, probably due to rubbing fabric. Completely absurd. My mind refused to accept any explanation, but the terrible truth was gradually being seen. The feeling of being watched 10 times again, causing the fluff on my arm to stand up. Each breath is like breathing in fragments, cold in my lungs. I continued to glance at the corners of the room, making sure that this time I would glance at a movement, a certain shape that I could not call my name hiding. My paranoia increased that I felt almost exhausted from stress. Desperate because I want to have some control of a certain control, I decided to record everything meticulously. I took pictures of scratches on the glass, although they were blurred and hard to look at the low light. I even reset the phone to write in the living room overnight, hoping to have any strange sound. But when it aired the next morning, everything I heard, apart from the usual noises of the house, was a sound of electricity, faint when diving over time. It is almost like breathing, a heavy breath, distorted, full of illness. It is enough to make me goosebumps. In the final effort to regain alertness and security, I rearranged the furniture in the living room so that I can see the window clearly, even if I am insured, from anywhere in the room. I also turned on all the lights in the house, even during the day, pulling all the curtains in the other rooms. Trying to repel the darkness seemed to cling to me as a living entity. But that doesn't help. Every time I heard the smallest noise, the sound of the floor was trapped. The sound of the wind blowing through the door, my heart tightened in my chest. My throat suffocated and cold sweat flowed into a flow behind my back. The nights are really bad. Every cry of the house turned into a step in my imagination. Each wind rustling outside the window becomes a sinister presence looking at the walls, looking for entrance. My own reflection in the mirror of the corridor was sometimes startled that almost shouted. The boundary between what is true and just the product of the nervous system is tense. My sleep is lacking. I started asking my own awareness, wondering if I was really out of control. Perhaps I am imagining this entire nightmare from a deep abyss in subconscious? But then I will remember the cold, wet feeling of that first fingerprint. My fingertips are pulled out of the cold glass. Remember the deeper scratches. No, something is true. One evening, when I was walking around the living room, full of energy non-stop, I found that the picture covered the window, trembling, very light. At first, I thought it was due to the wind from the air conditioning system, so I turned it off. But the fabric continued to vibrate, a gentle but persistent vibration, as if someone was knocking his finger continuously on the glass surface from the other side. My stomach is cramped. I felt a nausea rising up my throat as adrenaline runs on my body, tightening each muscle. I slowly to the window, my footsteps gently on the floor. My hand was so trembling that I had to hold them in a fist to keep my appearance. Finally, when I stood just a few inches away from the fabric, I could almost feel moving behind the glass. Not only to see the vibration of the fabric, but also a feeling of energy about the presence of activity. My scalp is tingling, and I may feel blood in the blood vessels. Time seemed to slow down, and my own pounding heart echoed in my mind. No need to notify. A dry, sharp cry tore the silence. The entire window frame shook violently, as if a huge, invisible series of a terrible musical instrument has just been defeated. I staggered backwards, almost fell to the floor, my breathing in my throat. That presence, no matter what it is on the other side, is checking the barrier again. more powerful. This time, it made me undeniable that it became more bolder, more impatient. My instant reaction is to strengthen the window. I found some old wooden planks in the warehouse, took a thick tape and anything else could be used to block the window. I closed the board on the window, stuck on top of each other. The living room now looks like a closed tomb, darker and more stuffy than ever. Every day passed. The darkness in that room seemed to be more dense, as if it was a living creature that was nurturing with my own horror. My thoughts became more crazy and discreet. My reflection image in the mirror looks emaciated, deep and lifeless. I could not focus on my work. I could not participate in any normal conversation. My mind always drifted into that closed window, about the presence of gray hands, about deeper scratches. In the end, I could not stand in the living room after it was dark. I arranged a temporary sleeping place back to the bedroom, locked the 3 layers of the rear door, the bedroom door, and even blocked a chair in the door handle. But even there, away from the living room, I could still hear weak noise, but still persevered. Light import, cracked. The sound of the scratch is very far. Sometimes, I swear that I heard a hurry, despair, strangling, hoping through the walls. My heart beat so fast that my vision sometimes faded on the edges. I often find myself almost holding my breath, trying to breathe normally when every long minute of the night passed. One night, when the exhaustion of Tai Chi finally lulled me into a nightmare, a large beat, like thunder, rang from the living room window, causing me to stand up, sit straight on the bed. My lungs hard as if I had just been submerged in ice. I know I can't escape forever. Lying in bed cringing for fear will not solve anything. It will not end. Summon all the last courage, the last little reason not to be swallowed by fear. I gradually left the bed. I walked into the corridor, step by step of the heavy steps. When I approached the living room, a series of sharp, constant sprinkles rang out, as if something stabbed into the glass with a natural power, a power that did not belong to this world. My skin is famous for a scary primary electricity. I stared at the door of the living room closed. Weak light from the corridor threw it under the door slot. And then I saw it through the door slot, on the living room floor, small pieces of sparkling glass. It breaks the glass. I pushed the door of the living room. The room was dark, only light from the corridor. I looked into the window with a barrier. The fabric has been torn in many places, revealing broken glass pieces, jagged on wooden boards and ice. And there, on a large piece of glass left, the shape of our fingers out abnormally, near like claws. Ty's vision seemed to fade for a moment. In a fleeting moment, the shrimp was a gentle movement of the darkness. The village was cramped, and the shrimp felt strange, absurdly invading. It brings the mind of Thomas racing. Is that shrimp is really shielding? What you really change the eyes of shrimps burning because of the constant sleep, and the whole body of shrimps, but despite the fear, the shrimp still take a step closer towards the window. The cracks on the glass fluttering now looks more like claws than ever before, although it is something inside but broken. Fear, stress, helplessness. Shrimp grabbed a heavy bang stick with kilomet of hand tumor. Although the half expect to see the window shattered completely, revealing anything hiding. Instead of the blade, only that picture in that moment, a painful pressure feel like shrimp. In the eyes, everything was silent. Completely silent. Thomas held her breath in a rich second, but nothing. Although the body was so trembling that Thomas had to rely on adrenaline, it was still strong in the blood vessels, leaving a strange feeling of relief, but though Thomas, it found a way to repel it, even if it was temporary, even for a moment. The mind of shrimps now, some trauma has passed since that night. Although the canvas cloth is still torn, the window is still // in a positive area. Ho hang hang after it seems to be the current, it remains silent. Although a little relieved, although waiting for the appropriate opportunity. Waiting, though losing family scenes. Waiting is weak. However, 11111 when pulled out the glass, or a shadow that was gliding through the welding. The shrimp heart wobbled again with each light, but each one was just waiting. The atmosphere in the guest is still abundant, although sometimes, but the reason of the instinct of shrimp is that it is waiting for a sign of weakness. Or that's probably it is equal to the shrimp, so that all the banks in the eye of the heart are divided between the two worlds. And although that thought, the uncertainty was the ability to be that one of him, the next time he returned home, although and something was waiting for Thomas to be on the other side. That fear is many shapes. Tao when it knocked the door from behind the wall. Changing and changing when... That religion is another basis, though used to stay many years ago before this Engli. A place of hunger is about a wardrobe. It sounds trivial, right? But nothing is imported about that cabinet. Right from the time when he entered the stench of old and moisture, it seemed abundant when he actually noticed that the atmosphere was dense, heavy, as if he had just entered a place where Thomas was slightly faster, and a cold, gentle sweat covered with girls. The door of the wardrobe looks old. The white paint is tied to the place. It always revealed a small space, just as wide as a hand. But for some reason, it never opened it broadly. It kept revealing the tranquility of the late evening, the chorus and every second of the brooch. Although he became more and more awakened, it was waiting. Although the landlord, a man in him, but the rent is low, and the apartment itself but wearing, but as soon as the flooring in the corridor seems to sleep. Those are light, very weak, behind the wall, the sounds that are strange but strange details in every apartment that has lived before. But here, the door of the cabinet seems to be stuck, inserted for D, whether you can pull it hard to the letter or try to let it move further. One evening, in frustration, shrimp one or two more before you felt it was the first time the shrimp tint whispered. It was too faint, almost did not hear. Initially, that stupid shrimp, or it was the sound of the neighbor's television. But it is not like the voice. It is like breath. A breath of a snail, abundant. Near G, a chill running along the back of the shrimp, but in the next, the whisper becomes more and more often. It was not bigger, but it seemed that the nights were, but the religion pointed to the village millimeter. But it was enough for when me felt deep insecurity. Occasionally, at night, Thomas found herself crept from the shrimp, and the light was weak in the 5 warehouses. However, shrimp is always the feeling that importing M walls is so simple. After a week of constant insomnia and the increasing NGYY paranoia, the shrimp, although shrimp feel more confident than a friend. Although leaning on the wooden door, a creaking sound of the heart when the heart was then completely opened, and to reveal a dark space, a space despite all the logic about Thomas stood there. In the dizziness, the breathing stared at the shadow, not the interior of a normal wardrobe.